So my name is John. I work as the preserve manager for the Westchester Land Trust. And I'll just kind of introduce myself a little bit before I do this. My background, actually, I started in this field as an avian technician. So my background, a lot of it is in birds. I worked in a lab in college working with tree swallows. And after that, I got asked to help out with search for a Tachysonetta species, a type of swallow called the golden swallow in Jamaica. And that was like one of my first jobs was just kind of bouncing around Jamaica looking for this bird that everyone thought was extinct. And it turned out it was extinct. We didn't actually find it. But after that, I did work with scrub jays in California. I worked with different birds throughout different projects. I did some like bird banding in college. And after that, I kind of moved into more habitat work. I kind of felt like my impact was a lot stronger by rather than just working with birds, by being able to impact habitat for birds. So I worked in Wisconsin for a little while, creating prairie habitat for grassland bird species, and also creating sandbar habitat for sandhill cranes, for like stopover habitat. We had a property with a really large, about 10,000 strong like group of cranes that would come during migration as a stopover. From that, I kind of decided to go into land management, and that's how I ended up here. I grew up in this area, and I really like the birds and the wildlife around here. So now I work for the Westchester Land Trust. The Westchester Land Trust is an organization that protects land and really tries to connect people to land as well. We have 35 preserves. About 12 of them have trails that are open to the public and people can enjoy, and all of them have birds. So all of our preserves I see as important bird habitat. One of my favorite from a birding perspective, I'm just going to plug, is Otter Creek Preserve in Mamaroneck. That's where I've seen the most interesting species, including glossy ibis. There's nesting osprey. We have nesting willow flycatcher. So lots of interesting things. So my presentation today is actually going to focus on a particular restoration project that we've been doing. It's our restoration around beech leaf disease and promoting natural tree regeneration in beech stands impacted by this disease. I just want you to know we do a lot of different habitat restoration, all of which benefits birds, and I'm happy after this to really speak about all of that. If anyone has questions about other projects we've done. So I'm just going to get right into it: beech leaf disease and birds. So to start, what is beech leaf disease? I'm focusing my presentation around this because beech are very important trees, and beech leaf disease is a disease that really is threatening one of the crucial trees in our forest. And since the forest is what shelters birds, this is also threatening the bird communities in our forest. So beech leaf disease is a disease that is only infesting beech trees, and as the name suggests, you first see it in the leaves. So if you're walking through a forest in your local area, really look up, especially at beech trees. If you don't know beech trees, they're really distinctive. They have very smooth bark. There's nothing like it. It's just completely smooth gray bark. They're the trees people always carve their initials into. And if you look in the winter, their buds are very long and sharp. It's one thing that's very noticeable, and they often form small thickets of sapling trees because they're one of the few trees the deer don't like to eat. So if you look up in the growing season when the leaves are out, with beech leaf disease, you'll see that the infected trees have dark barring under the leaves between the leaf veins. You can kind of see this in the picture to the right. You see the light green, which is the natural color of the leaves, and then the dark green, which is the infected sections. It's likely caused by a microscopic worm called a nematode, and after the leaves start to bar, they'll eventually curl up and drop. And according to the New York State DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, beech leaf disease will probably cause tree death in 2 to 7 years. And the reason I say that, like probably, is this disease is so new, we're not really sure how it's going to affect our forest yet, and there's still a lot of research that has to be done. So why is beech leaf disease a problem? Well, first, beech are very important to the local ecosystem. So beech nuts, beech, like, oaks produce acorns, hickory trees produce hickory nuts. All of this is kind of called hard mast. It's a really important food source in the fall for wildlife, including some birds like turkeys, and also mammals like bears and deer and small mammals. Beech are also really important as the host of 100 species of caterpillars. If any of you have ever heard anything by Doug Tallamy, he always talks about caterpillars as bird food. If you really want to attract birds, you have to feed them, and caterpillars are what they like to feed their nestlings. So we have to grow native trees so we can feed the caterpillars that feed the birds. Because most caterpillars strongly favor a specific tree because they've adapted with that tree. Most caterpillars don't eat many different types of trees. If the beech decline, all of the caterpillars that these birds depend on that live on beech will also decline. Beech are also really important because they germinate in deep shade. Most trees need sun, but beech can germinate in the understory of a forest. Because of this, older growth forests often have a lot of beech, and the loss of beech, I think, could really damage some of our old growth in this area, similarly to how the loss of hemlock has had a really bad impact on a lot of our old growth. And this beech leaf disease is important because beech are a really common tree. I've heard some people say that about 1 out of every 10 trees in forests in Westchester is a beech tree. And unfortunately, they're not evenly spread out through the forest. They often clump up. So certain sections of the forest, if beech trees end up starting to die, certain sections of the forest will be really hit hard by beech leaf disease. Another reason this is concerning is it's spreading really fast, and we don't know how to stop the spread. And there's a map on your left, and you can see this is the 2022 extent of this disease. And the epicenter of beech leaf disease in our region, one of the first spots the DEC found it was actually one of my preserves, the Zophnis family preserve in Pound Ridge. So let's get back to birds. So how will beech leaf disease affect birds? A big part of this is the loss of food. Beech nuts are really important for turkeys. There's a picture of some turkeys on a WLT easement to my right. To the right of the screen. But it's not just about the beech nuts. Like I said before, caterpillars are a really important source of food for nestling birds, and beech shelter a lot of caterpillar diversity. If we lose the beech, we're going to lose those caterpillars as well. There's also, I think beech are very important for nesting habitat because deer don't eat beech. The saplings form these dense thickets in the woods, and if any of you have walked in the woods around here, you've probably seen a lot of emptiness. Our woods, except for some invasive shrubs, they're really not structurally complex. There's not a lot of understory because the deer are pretty much eating everything due to the overabundant deer herd. So beech, since the deer don't like to eat beech, they've been a really important component of that understory that birds could nest in. And of course, the overstory as well. So there's loss of nesting habitat. And one thing I've noticed in my preserves is that forest degradation is not limited to the first trees that die. We had another disease wipe through forests recently, emerald ash borer, and it often affected trees outside of the ash because once the ash trees died, those trees were more susceptible to stressors such as high winds because there was no one buffering them. And they were also more susceptible to vines because with the increased sunlight, vines could climb up them and kill them. There is one plus. I have noticed more woodpeckers, and I don't know if this is just anecdotal, but we've lost a lot of trees, and the woodpeckers are loving the dead snags. So what are we doing to protect bird habitat at Westchester Land Trust? So unfortunately, I want to start this with, we don't know how to save the beach yet. There's a lot of people that are working really hard to develop ways to protect beech trees from this disease, but we don't really have a cure yet. I've talked to a lot of people. There's a lot of kind of ideas, but nobody's sure. However, we can save the overall forest. This is a picture of me out in a beach stand in Pound Ridge in 2021, looking at how bad this disease might be impacting our forests there. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is how we can protect the forest, which obviously is very important as bird habitat. So the number one culprit to my right is this deer, which was actually captured on a camera trap at the Zoffness Family Preserve in Pound Ridge. Because we have a ton of deer in this area, it's almost like you can imagine a field with too many cows. Eventually the field becomes overgrazed. Right now, because we have so many deer in our forests, the forests are becoming overgrazed. And one of deer's favorite things to eat is young trees. Because of this, I've had a lot of trouble with trees naturally growing in my preserves. I see almost no trees. Whenever a tree falls and there's sunlight on the ground, almost no trees are able to take advantage of that because the deer pretty much eat them to the ground. So I'm worried that with this huge loss of trees in our forests, we're not going to see trees coming back in the spaces where older trees have died. And that could cause larger scale forest degradation over time, which again, will degrade the habitat that's important for birds. So what are we doing about this? At my right here is a map of beech stands in a northern section of the Zoffness Family Preserve in Pound Ridge. We worked with our interns in 2021 and went out with GPS units and actually mapped all of the beech stands in that preserve. So all the dark green lines are the preserve's trails, and then the light green is all of the beech stands, and the black is the outline of the preserve within that map. We defined a beech stand as an area that had more than 30% beech overstory, but some of these stands had up to 80% beech overstory, which meant they were, the vast majority of trees in the stand were beech. The second thing we did, it's pretty simple, it's just 3 steps. The second thing we did was we first removed invasive species. The reason for doing this is that beech stands are often really not invaded habitats. If you don't know what invasive species are, they're basically plants from other areas of the world, such as Europe or Asia, that because they don't have any natural herbivores in our, there's no caterpillars that eat them, they're often not eaten by our larger herbivores. There's nothing that really puts a check on their populations, and they can kind of grow out of control. Because often nothing eats them, they also don't really support the ecosystem because they don't support the caterpillars that then support birds. Beech stands often are not invaded. They often have really high native biodiversity and very low amounts of invasive plants. But we're worried that with the amount of sunlight that's coming into these stands, with the canopy dying, that new invasives will come in. So the first step was we actually transected the woods. We went out with groups of people and we tried to remove all of the invasives, which wasn't actually that many, so they wouldn't spread once the sunlight hit the understory. You can see there's actually a group of people from Van Cortlandt Park Conservancy. I did a little collaboration with them where I sent my interns down to Van Cortlandt Park to help them with the project, and then their interns came up to Pound Ridge to help us with this project. So these are interns from Van Cortlandt Park, sorry, not Conservancy, Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, that are helping with our transecting and removal of invasive species. And then the last thing that we did was we worked with Groundwork Hudson Valley to build deer fences and protect other ways of protecting native regeneration. So the idea is we map the beech stands, we know where the problem is, we remove the invasive species that could take over. Now the third step is to get trees to grow. Generally, you don't need to plant trees. All you need to do is keep them from getting eaten by deer, and the forest can restore itself. As long as there's enough sunlight. If you just put a fence out in the woods and shade, you wouldn't necessarily get new trees growing. But if in a sunlit area, such as an area where the canopy is dying back from a disease, you will get trees to grow. Instead of us just going out and doing this work, we decided to make it an educational opportunity. So we worked with high schoolers through Groundwork Hudson Valley. They have a group called the Green Team, if anyone's ever heard of it. It's kids from Yonkers public schools that are hired and paid to work on environmental work all summer. And we contracted with them to basically send their vans up here and help us build, we built 5 deer fences, and it was about 2,000 linear feet of fence. And our goal, all of those deer fences were built in areas with really high beech canopy, and the goal is to get new trees to grow in those areas. So what were the results of all of this work? We mapped 15 acres of beech stands. We then removed invasives. Over 10 of those acres of beech stands, 1,800 plants were removed in total. And then we promoted tree regeneration, new trees to grow by excluding deer. We did that, like I said, through 5 deer fences with 30 tree tubes on natural regeneration, so it could grow. And we planted what are called live stakes. Those are basically sticks you can just knock into wetland soils that will grow into trees. And we did that with sycamores, which are one of the only tree species that you can do that. So I don't know if this is showing up. For some reason, it's not on my screen. There might be a small error. But what it says here below the 2 pictures is let's bring this back to birds. How does this work affect birds? You see on the left, there's a photo of one of our forests. There are some beech in that forest. You can see all the sunlight. A lot of that's from like canopy dieback, but also you can see there's not a lot of understory. You know, the birds can nest in the canopy, but there's not really that much that they can make use of in the understory. Obviously, some birds do nest on the ground, but there's not as much structure in that habitat for birds. So one of our goals is to create bird habitat while we do this work. The forest will eventually regrow with a helping hand through deer exclusion, but I actually weirdly see this crisis as an opportunity. In the meantime, this is a really good opportunity to create young forest habitat, which is important for a lot of different declining bird species. In other preserves, we've worked to protect shrubland habitat by removing some trees, and we've seen eastern towhee come in. We have preserves where we've helped create habitat for American woodcock by letting some shrubby areas grow into shrub thickets near wetlands and wet meadows. I haven't seen this one, but I would love to attract blue-winged warbler to our preserves. Another thing we're trying to do is by promoting complexity, we can create understory habitat within the forest while we're restoring the forest and trying to grow trees back. My hope is that this could create habitat for birds such as wood thrush, which like to nest in the understory, black-throated blue warbler, and American redstart. Which often, because there's not enough complexity of habitat in a lot of our ecosystems, they don't have as good nesting habitat as they should. So I'm just going to end with, we're not doing this on our own. There's a lot of organizations that are trying to deal with a really complex and scary issue, beech leaf disease, and you probably recognize a lot of those logos. Primarily, this effort has basically what's happened is Westchester Land Trust and Westchester County Parks, 2 of the larger forest holders in our area, we're really worried about losing, forest, bird habitat to this disease. And we've brought in all of these other organizations, Teatown, Mianus River Gorge, Hudson Highlands Land Trust, North Salem Open Land Foundation. And our goal is to work together to educate the public on beech leaf disease and how we can restore forests that are impacted by this disease, and also to work to increase the amount of forest that's being restored, and work, providing supplies and equipment and expertise to increase the amount of work that's being done. So I just wanted to say thank you. This project, the beach leaf disease work, was all paid for by the Lower Hudson Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, Lower Hudson PRISM, using funds from the Environmental Protection Fund as administered by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. I also want to say that this is, I thought it'd be easier just to focus on one project we're doing, but we've done many projects, including in Mamaroneck with planting 600 trees, creating bird habitat. We've just did a 250 tree planting in Yorktown at our Hunter Brook Preserve. And we do a lot of different projects to improve forest habitat, forest health, and other types of habitat health, which in the end, it will always affect birds. Thank you.